And actually, here is the map of the Middle East, just to kind of reiterate what I was talking about. I might have lost you on a little bit when I went over. So again, just look here. Here's Egypt. Here's the Sinai Desert. Okay. And so this is kind of almost like a buffer zone that's under Egypt's control until after the 6-Day War. Here's Israel, which Palestine was all of this at one point. In 1948, okay, so and the British took over this after the Ottoman Turks at the end of World War I. Okay, so from 1920 to 1948, it was under the British. And Arab and Jewish fighters actually committed acts of terrorism against the British to kick them out. And it was just becoming too hot to hold for the British. And again, the Jews were better mobilized. They faced a war from all their Arab neighbors, and they were very ineffectual, and Israel was effectual. And it was created. Then the 6-Day War here. At the end of the war, this territory again is no longer under the hands of Jordan. Golan Heights from Syria here is removed. Gaza here, and then actually all of the Sinai. Later on, Egypt will fight Israel in the Yom Kippur War and get the Sinai back and give up Gaza, any claims to it. And you're going to see Jordan make peace with Israel and give up the West Bank, any kind of claims to it. And you're essentially going to have a whole other set of issues happening up here. Okay, and so again, just to kind of give you a more visualization of this. By the way, the Negev, sorry, I pointed over here, I pointed wrong. The Negev is the desert that I meant to say that was taken, that was captured by Israel. Okay, and so the Negev is going to be given up. So I think I said that wrong a little bit. Trying to backtrack here. Any question, or if you look a little bit confused about what I said, feel free to give me a call or write to me. Okay, so enough on that for now. The Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. De-Stalinization. So, Stalin, I told you he was popular for a while. We talked about how he defeats Hitler, and he becomes the admiration of people like Picasso, Pablo Neruda, the famous Chilean poet. A lot of people that you would be surprised that you know of actually loved Stalin, but news started to get back to people that things didn't seem to be going right, or they weren't as they seemed. And there became a certain disillusion with Stalinism. And then it really came to a head when Stalin dies and Khrushchev comes to power. He basically says, okay, everybody, let's be honest. Stalin was not a nice guy. And he makes these kind of open confessions of what Stalin really did, from purging from the top to the bottom. This was kind of a pressure relief on one hand. It was also very controversial because the Soviet state basically created a cult around Stalin. And even though a lot of people knew that it wasn't true, then all of a sudden there's just like the state saying, okay, by the way, I know you've been hearing about this since kindergarten, but okay, he really was kind of an asshole. And that didn't set right with everybody, and for other people it was great. And it threw things off even in places like China, where they may not have liked Stalin that much as well. And Stalin and Mao and the Chinese communists had some issues, but it was like, it just seemed to undermine a lot of things about the state. It is very complicated in terms of the results, but ultimately, it seemed to be that the Soviet leadership wanted to change directions from the way that things were going on under Stalin. But as we'll see, they only went so far. Khrushchev, makes these announcements. Some top party leaders actually commit suicide after this, just You have a release of prisoners from labor camps. What I think is very fascinating here is these poor characters coming out of these gulags. I mean, he released 4.5 million prisoners from slave labor camps. That's a very impressive thing to do on that end. And yet many of them, when they got back to their homes, were just a mess. I mean, you can imagine going back to wives that already remarried, families that are embarrassed of you, people not really quite sure of what to make of what to do with you when you get out. But they were freed nonetheless. It says in this textbook that there ended up there still were about 1 million people in the Soviet labor camps after it was all done. At least 1 million prisoners. What's interesting now is the United States holds roughly over 4 million prisoners in our prison system, and many are nonviolent offenders. I'm going to get controversial. Many of them are disproportionately people of color. I mean, I just want you to think about, we have almost 4 million people in prison right now. We have one of the largest prison populations in the world. So it's interesting when we look at Stalin's era, and I'm no way comparing us to the Stalinist era, but I'm just pointing out that our prison population has become quite inflated. And, you have to take note of that when you look at what we're reading here, I think. Now, okay, so there also, though, became problems for people of religious faith. And these reforms that were happening in the Soviet Union weren't necessarily going all that well. As I said, it was kind of mixed. Okay, so here's some of the nations on the outskirts of the Soviet Union that end up being incorporated into the Soviet sphere, right? Okay, that are communist, okay, and they're going to react in different ways to this. So you basically have a lot of people trying to resist under Khrushchev, thinking that maybe he gave a green light for more freedoms than actually were there. And when Khrushchev is put out of power, a lot of the things that he set up were seen to have gone too far. And so Brezhnev comes to power, and he emerges as the new leader. And he was basically interested in really keeping a stronghold of Soviet interests, okay? And he wanted to change kind of direction of things and rely on repression and to deal with nationalism among non-Russian populations very harshly. So some of the things that ends up happening, just for example, I'll just cover. Hungary resisted and was squashed. And in Czechoslovakia, communists there made these really open reforms that were really making it look like that they could be a communist state and have a lot of freedoms. But the Soviet Union was so fearful that that would turn into a state breaking off and becoming pro-Western that the Soviets actually invaded communist Czechoslovakia, took down the communist leaders there, and then created a Russian communist occupation of Czechoslovakia. For many Czechoslovakians, this was humiliating and confusing, that they weren't invaded by imperialist Western powers, but another communist country basically telling them that they didn't do it right, and that it left a very sour and kind of just disoriented feeling for people in Czechoslovakia. If you've ever read the novel The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which is my favorite novel, maybe next to Oscar Wilde's Picture of Dorian Gray, The Unbearable Lightness of Being is my favorite novel, and it's written by Milan Kundera, who is a Czechoslovakian. He was a writer from Czechoslovakia who ended up he's been in France for so long, he considers himself a French writer. But it's a wonderful kind of love story that's very psychological, but throughout the story, it weaves in all this political drama from this time period. It's a great piece to try to get a feel for the Cold War from a very different kind of point of view, other than this textbook historical approach. Okay, so I just want to kind of put that there. And so essentially, I'm going to stop this lecture here for this chapter, and I'm going to encourage you to read a lot of the points. I feel like I've kind of skipped over too many important things. But again, we have an abundance of serious topics here. There's a lot on science and culture that we could talk about also. But ultimately, what I want you to do is I want you to just kind of see that when you look at many of the conflicts now, that a lot of it has to do with this post World War II era. And what I'm going to go into the last chapter is then the post-Soviet era. So we're really dealing with two chunks, post-World War II and then the post-Soviet era, which is what I'm going to then address in the last chapter for our entire section now.